Welcome back to this new inspirational video. Today I wanted to go over a part of a lecture given by Neville Goddard titled, "Is Christ Your Imagination?" And he started out the following way. Tonight's subject is in the form of a question. Is Christ your imagination? When we ask the question, we expect the answer in terms of our current background of thought, and quite often that is not adequate to frame the answer. Now I'm asking the question, and in order to answer myself, I should really clarify the terms imagination and Christ. I think there will be no problem tonight if I define, say, imagination. I think you will agree with me when I define Christ. If I say to that imagination is the power of performing mental images, you wouldn't quarrel with that. Sitting here tonight, you can think of anything and see it mentally. You may not see it as graphically as you see it in its present form in the room at the moment, but you could see it vividly in the mind's eye and discriminate. Think of a tree, a horse, and you know the difference between one and the other, and they are two separate objects in your mind's eye. Well, that is the power of imagination. When it comes to Christ, and there are hundreds of millions in the world that call themselves Christians, the very use of the word instantly conjures in the mind's eye a person. They think of Christ as a person, and no two have the same mental pictures of this person. I know many years ago in New York City, this French artist went to the library on 42nd Street and brought up 46 different pictures of Christ and screened them with his little lantern. No two were alike, and each artist claimed that this was an inspired picture as it was presented to him, and he painted the picture. There were blonde and blue-eyed pictures, dark swarthy skin. There were those with a very black skin. All 46 pictures were projected as so-called originals. So man has been conditioned to believe that Christ is a person. So again I ask the question, is Christ your imagination? Can I personify the imagination? Well, I will. Let us go back to the Bible. What does the Bible say of Christ? In Paul's first letter to the Corinthians, and Neville added, I will just give you the highlights. He defines Christ as the power and wisdom of God. In John 1st, which brings Christology to its height as far as the Bible goes, there's no single book that takes the secret of Christ and brings it to this height, as you will find in the Gospel of John. In this Gospel, John is speaking now of this presence that was with God, his meaning, his power. By him all things were made, and without him was not anything made that was made. It is the power, and yet it is wisdom. So here it is, a creative power. If I take that now and analyze myself in another world, the sign goes to the end of the second letter to the Corinthians. He calls upon all of us who would read that letter. Test yourselves. Do you not realize that Jesus Christ is in you? Here we are told, all things were made by him. He is the power of God and the wisdom of God. Every attribute of God is personified, so his power is personified. And may I confess, I have seen that power, and it is man. I have seen that wisdom, and it is a man. And when you stand in the presence of that personified aspect of infinite being, you know you are standing in the presence of infinite might. It is not just power, it is almightiness, and you stand in the presence, and yet it is a man. So here he calls it the power and the wisdom. Now for the average person, so we're gonna go off track here a little bit because I want to further explain some of these points. Neville quickly mentioned here that if he were to analyze himself in another world, well then this all becomes more clear. Now, what does that actually mean, analyzing yourself in another world? This essentially is hinting at that moment when you go to sleep at night and your consciousness awakens in a different world. That's literally what happens. When you're dreaming, you are essentially in a different world. And it's in that place you can actually analyze these truths from a very spiritual point of view, not limited by physical, limitations and contradictions that we observe through the senses. With me, myself, personally, I have stood in the presence of infinite love. Now, the way to describe this is so tricky, and even Neville didn't really, convey it in such a way that it would make sense necessarily to everyone on the earth. If I were to tell you what I have experienced myself in those worlds, they wouldn't always make sense to you, but I can only tell you that it is true that these aspects and attributes of God that they're talking about in the Bible can be experienced for yourself in that other world, in that spiritual world of the soul. So with me, I was in a place, a forest, that looked so luminous, so beautiful, and I was surrounded by the power of love from every direction. It was the only thing I could feel. I was literally incapable of thinking negative. I could only feel compassion for all of creation. I was filled with it through my entire soul. There was no place inside of me that didn't have compassion. I would think of someone and something, and instantly it would be, well, created within my mind from a point of view of total compassion for that person or thing, no matter what they have done. So here, physically speaking, we have all these limitations and contradictions and negative states of mind potentially that we may indulge in, but spiritually speaking, from the oneness of God, you could never do it. You are God, and God doesn't hate creation, it loves creation, it gave you your life. So for you to have such an experience, to analyze yourself in another world, well, take some serious time to consider. Can I become aware in the dream world? Because you can. Maybe you've never done it, but that is what will help you understand the symbolism of the Bible and any other spiritual text from a much deeper level. Now, if it doesn't happen to you, also don't feel bad, because this spiritual world is where you're going to go anyway. That is essentially what will happen if you pass away. So that is the good news in a way, if you think about it. That world, that spiritual realm, is going to be part of what you'll be experiencing anyway. But you can have some interesting and fascinating experiences before you actually leave this world, physically speaking. So that's what I'm getting at. And you can study this for yourself. Lucid dreaming, dream yoga. These terms, if you look them up online, for example, in books, you can find ancient scriptures that actually talked about this and try to help people who read it to figure out how they can have the experience. But again, we should do this with a calm, open mind and not get frustrated if it doesn't happen to us right away, or perhaps it takes a long time for us to finally have the experience. Now, I'm only telling you this because I have had the experience, but it doesn't happen every single night to me either. So then sometimes I might catch myself being a little frustrated, where I'm like, I wasn't aware when I was dreaming, sadly, because when I am, some wonderful things always happen. Like these things are out of this world, literally. Now, Neville went on to say that John in the scriptures then asks me, you the reader, to test ourselves. Test yourself. Do you not realize that Jesus Christ is in you, and he made all these things? Well then, let us put him to the test. I say he is our imagination. That is the power, the creative power of the universe. Look around you. Do you know anything in the world of man that man is created, from the clothes that he wears to the homes that he inhabits, that wasn't first imagined? Do you know of anything in this world that is now proved as fact, as a concrete reality, that wasn't first imagined? Only imagined, and then externalized. Yes, we are using hands, using implements of the world to create it, but it first began as an image in the mind. And an image is simply the product of this reforming image-making faculty in man, which is his imagination. Now, if all things were made by him, and then without him was not anything made that was made, I can't come to any other conclusion than the fact that Christ of Scripture is my imagination. Now let that really sink in. It is very against the normal way of thinking and programming that we have about the Bible and this figure called Christ or even Jesus, because he ties into this. Now, who is Jesus? If Christ is the power and wisdom of God, and God sunk himself in us, that was his sacrifice. He actually became us that we may live. For were it not for this sacrifice of God to actually limit himself to the state called man, man would, like the earth, wear out like a garment. As we are told in Isaiah, lift up your eyes to the heavens, and look at the earth beneath, for the heavens will vanish like smoke. The earth will wear out like a garment, and they who dwell in it will do likewise. But my salvation will be forever, and my deliverance will never be ended. That word salvation means Jesus. That word Jesus is Jehovah saves. That is salvation. That is forever. Were it not that God became man, that man may become God, to save man and lift him up to immortality, because the promise is the earth will wear out like a garment. Our scientists tell us today that the sun is melting in radiation. If it took unnumbered billions of years, if it started a process of melting, no matter how long it takes, it has an end. And with its end, we have our end as part of the system. So we, walking the earth, always have an end. to stop that process of bringing man to an end. My salvation will be forever and my deliverance will never have an end. So God became man, he became you, that you and I may become God. In becoming man, as God is the only creative power in the world, what in me creates? My imagination. So what in you creates? Your imagination. Now I may not have the talent to put it on paper. You may not have that talent, or you may have it. It depends. Now we may have not the ability to execute it the way artists can, but I can imagine it. You can imagine whatever you want. I can imagine a book and the joy of having a book. I can imagine a picture. Without being an artist, I can dream. I cannot conceive of a picture that a man can paint on canvas that is more alive than my dream. Yet I can't put a thing on canvas, but I go to sleep and I can dream. And what is doing it if not my imagination? And here, when I lose the conscious faculty, this restricted area, I can actually dream. Dream as no artist in the world conveys. Put color upon it, put motion upon it, and have the most wonderful drama, and that is my imagination. And that is also where I wanted to end this part of the lecture Neville Goddard gave, because he goes into some other details about other people and life in general. But this is absolutely beautiful, especially the ending. It's very important for you and me to grasp this, that he's talking about having this power called imagination through which we can create. Now, of course, there are things that other people are creating that when we were to consider creating such a thing ourselves, we feel incapable of doing it. For example, I wouldn't have the voice to be a singer. Like, I wouldn't even try on camera or on audio for you, because trust me, it wouldn't sound really pretty. But some people, some men or women, have a beautiful voice. So if they use their imagination to come up with lyrics, it's like God is singing through them. That's essentially what's happening. Now that is what you want to grasp for yourself, is that you have your own unique dreams and desires that you would be very highly passionate about doing. And you know why that is? It's because God is expressing them with and through you. That is where the joy of the soul comes in. It's a joy that is so deeply into your entire being that life becomes actually meaningful. Now, the other part that he talked about is that the earth shall wear out like a garment. So as a man, we have an end as well. But the goal is to stop that. Now, how can that happen? Again, remember what we said earlier. We're talking about waking up in another world. When you go to sleep at night or when you pass away, you essentially enter a spiritual world of some kind. A different world, a different dimension. Now that is where the journey goes on for everyone, for all of eternity. You keep expanding and becoming more aware of your oneness with the universe in your own individual ways. There's no loss of identity or your individual identity. It's absolutely beautiful because this is the relationship, you could say, between you and God, a child of God, a son and daughter of the Most High. This relationship has been set in motion because of your current individuality. So you shouldn't underestimate you being alive is actually divine and beautiful and precious, but just way bigger than the physical side of life itself. Because there's a spiritual realm to this all, where you came from, that set this all in motion. And you've been given the power now to create for yourself. So if we're called upon to test ourselves, to see that the power of Christ is in us, we are called upon to imagine beyond what physical reality is dictating. So you have limitations physically speaking, just exercise your imagination. If you can reach that point that you can imagine your dream as being realized and actually feel the joy as if it was already true, then you're setting in motion the manifestation, the so-called energy of this dream will start to move itself into form with and through you. That is the beautiful part about all of this, and that is when you are starting to test yourself and discovering the power of Christ, which is in you. It's your own imagination. Never forget this. It might be controversial at first, but it's highly important to consider it for yourself if you want to set yourself free and find this unity and oneness you have with God itself, the power behind all of creation. Because ultimately that power is going to set you free from everything in your own world, and you've discovered the power in your own life to which you can create and set yourself free. Now there's actually one more paragraph I wanted to share that Neville Goddard said in this lecture that is highly important for us to consider and should give you great hope to the future yet to come. You will not be wearing these bodies, wonderful as they are for us, filled with all the passions of the world. And they are all wonderful, but it is not the body you will wear. You will be completely above the organization of sex. No need for this kind of creativity. Imagination becomes completely awake and you will create at will. And your imaginal act will become immediate objective fact. And what we call reality today, all this fabulous world of ours, may I tell you, I have seen it, it is all imagination. When man has played his part and God has completed his purpose, which is to bring forth from us himself and make us all gods with him, then these garments, made up of all the elements that feel so permanent and so wonderful, they will vanish like smoke. There isn't an element that wasn't brought into being by the creative power of God, by his own wonderful divine imagining, and it is sustained in me because he sustains it by his imaginal act. When he ceases that imaginal act, all the elements will melt, all vanish, and the world will be as though it never existed. But you and I will be lifted up above it all into an entirely different world, an eternal world. Now listen carefully to that sentence he said. It's God's purpose to bring forth from us himself and make us all gods with him. There you go, that is the ultimate truth that is perhaps a little wild to consider at first, but it is so true. You, I, everyone is destined to become gods themselves. And you can understand this truth again if you're aware in those different worlds which you enter when the body is asleep or once it passes away. It's better to do it while it's sleeping, or at least you can talk about it like I or he did, or anybody else that's talking about these subjects in their own way. Because what he said, that everything becomes an immediate objective fact, I've experienced this for myself 100%. I could think of something, imagine something. I would feel myself with this feeling as if I already had it, and out of the atmosphere around me it would manifest, it would materialize right then and there. And I could simply enjoy it if I wanted to. And that is the beauty of this all. That is part of that spiritual eternal world in which we all will be resurrected over time as we become more and more aware of the spiritual power that is within us, called imagination, called the Christ in scriptures. This is your destiny. This is what you will one day realize, and you will be resurrected into that unity with God, making you capable of imagining and objectifying it immediately. Yes, that world is so far beyond what we experience over here. It sounds like science fiction, but it is actually true, eternal spiritual truth of the soul. So I hope you look forward to that destiny unfolding for you, because that is what's going to happen to all of us. It's highly important for us to contemplate these messages and meditate upon them for ourselves, not to dismiss them right away because they go against how we've been raised. We just want to analyze them for ourselves and then play around with them, because they can do absolutely beautiful things for all of us. So if you have a dream, start imagining its manifestation in your mind. Start feeling what it would be like if it was true. And then keep yourself in that state of mind. Keep yourself walking and living from that mood of fulfilled desires and watch what happens. This is another way of confirming to us, through Neville's words, that imagination is indeed the symbolism for Christ back in the day and even for now. It will stay so for all of eternity, because the truth will never change. Now, if you're new to this channel, consider subscribing to receive inspirational videos on a regular basis. And with that being said, dear viewer, never forget that we are the dreamers.